I'm just standing on the main room stage for the first time in an empty main room.
Wow.
And Robin Williams walks through. And I'm taking in what happened that night. He's standing right next to me. He's taking in what happened that night. And I'm like, you have to say something. And I said, Mr. Williams? Anyone call me Robin? Hey, Robin. And he saw my shirt. He goes, oh, you're a door guy here? I go, yeah. He goes, Mitzi still make all the door guys for comics? I go, oh, yeah, Mr. Williamson, thank you so much for doing this benefit for the Comedy Store. And he said, Steve, I didn't do the benefit for the Comedy Store. He's like, I did it for you and all the other young comics. So it's nice to meet you. I wish it was in person, but this is cool.
Yeah. I was just going to say, for anybody listening, welcome to the Johnny Rogers Show. It's a brand new episode, and I'm joined with Steve Simeone. Say what's up to everybody, Steve.
Hey, buddies.
I reached out to you, I think, after hearing you on Ari Shafir's podcast. Like, I love listening to Skeptic Tank. It was such a good, as a comedian myself, like being able to hear him kind of the way he dives into certain like topics, and it's great. It's like educational almost to listen to. And he
Yeah,
would have these like 20-minute intros where he was just talking about everything. I'm like, man.
Ari's a special person, and I'm so grateful that he's my friend. Especially the older I get and the more distance I get from like the craziness of just living in LA. And I'm like, wait a second.
Yeah.
All of these people I'm friends with some of the coolest people in the world.
Dude, that's what
Like,
I'm realizing doing this podcast. I'm like, really? You want to do my podcast? Like, sick. You know what I mean?
so
Like,
cool, right?
you're like, this is so cool. Yeah.
So
So,
cool.
so you're on the East Coast right now, but you're still living in LA?
No,
No,
I
you moved.
left LA during the pandemic and I moved to rural Florida. I bought this
Nice.
little house and moved my parents in.
Oh, that's
And
awesome.
dude, it's awesome. And just now, I'm starting to like get back into that comedian grind, like a kind almost to where it was pre-COVID. Like I was just in LA for a couple days, then I drove to San Diego and did shows at the La Jolla Comedy Store. Just flew back last night. I'm in town this week because there's a bunch of weddings I have to go to. Then I fly back to LA, might have to go to Sacramento to just do post production on something. And
Yeah.
then anytime I'm going to California from now on, and I don't have to get back, I'm going to go to Joe Rogan's club in
Oh,
Austin.
yeah. Dude,
Cool.
I'm trying to go. Do you know Jason Rouse?
Yes.
Yeah, so he was on the podcast and he lives in Austin right now, and he like said, oh, on like July 1st, I'm gonna do like an all Canadian lineup. So he's like, come out to Austin and be on that show. I still have to confirm with him, but I'm like, that would be sick to be in Texas for July 4th also.
Oh, that'd
Like,
be so awesome.
it's the most American shit ever.
Yeah, you have to do like
Yeah.
that's a must. And
Trying to save every coin at this point. It's also the
uh,
most expensive time to fly to Texas.
uh, but
But
it's worth it.
yeah, 100%,
Dude, the
100%, it's worth it.
mothership
Yeah.
is it's the coolest place. It's just I can't even put it into words how awesome it is.
I also heard that Chappelle opened a club in Yellow Springs, which
That's true.
equally looks awesome. I don't know if you've seen Joke World, but they did this like it's like this new YouTube channel. Their tagline is basically Sports Center for comedy, and it's this one
Oh, that's
guy
cool.
that just does like all of these different like he'll do like randomly like best Theo Von podcast moments. Like he's literally like cutting together and like he's making the comedy community more accessible as a whole, I think. Because if you're a general person who just, I like comedy, but I don't have my favorites,
Yeah,
and you see one of these videos, you go, oh, I'm a fan of that person.
that's awesome.
Yeah, it's a cool idea. And it's doing well. So that's great to
Good
see.
for him. What a labor of love, though. That just sounds like
Oh,
so much
yeah.
work.
Yeah,
But if
yeah.
you love it, well, I mean, I have to check. Because first and foremost, I'm a fan of comedy.
Yeah.
Many.
It's a good follow. You'll like it then. Yeah.
Well, here, let me write that down. What's
Yeah.
it called?
Joke World, but there's no O in world, just WRLD.
So cool. And it's on YouTube.
Yeah, it's on YouTube. He has an Instagram page too. I think
Oh,
he's
that's
probably
awesome.
he's probably on everything. But yeah, it's a really cool follow.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool.
What was your one word for the episode?
Hope.
Hope. I like it. Why did that word come to mind for you?
Um, because I was on stage this weekend in La Jolla. I just recorded a special,
Nice.
and it's kind of like um just a bunch of greatest hits with a couple of really new bits in there. Because I got a new manager, and he was like, "Here's the thing, man. You've been in the game for 20 years, but nobody knows who you are. These bits are old to you, but the world's never seen them. So get them out there." And I'm like, "Okay." So I did shows Friday in La Jolla, and they were magical. It's an unbelievable room.
Wow.
If you ever get a chance to perform at the La Jolla Comedy Store, there's just something. Ask any comedy store guy. The La Jolla store is a special place. So Friday
Mhm.
was great. Like I was able to two different vibes at the show, but I was able to sort of be the comedian I always wanted to be, where like
Oh, interesting.
in the pocket with them, just truly connected. And I was creating with them. Like that's how I judge a great show. That if I'm saying things that I've never said before, but they come off as polished material because the audience was so receptive.
Mhm.
And then Saturday was just traditional crowds. They were great, but I felt like I was cheating if I did material. I don't know if you've ever been in that
Oh
zone.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I don't want to. I know if I say this bit, it'll work.
Yeah.
And I'm going through. I think it's a good thing for a comedian. Like I think what I'm entering into is like a growth phase, where I'm like,
Mm.
I'll stop my show and I'll just stare at the crowd and I'm thinking, what am I doing on stage? And then I go, this is a responsibility. What do you really want to say? And then I was talking to the manager of the Comedy Store, my buddy Ryan, on Sunday, and he was like, "Well, what are you trying to do?" And I was like, "I just want to instill hope." I go, "I don't want to just make people laugh.
Hmm.
I want to give them hope." And I know that's very ambitious, and it sounds self-righteous, and it could be douchey,
No,
but
but I
I'm like,
think it's an anchor for you, right? Like I think as comics, we need that sort of anchor, that thing that you're it's what keeps you motivated, what keeps you working. Like I had Trent McClellan on who's like works for This Hour Has 22 Minutes, and he was like, he's like, I've seen comics get like they get like a TV show and then it gets like a little too cushy and they stop going and doing stand-up sets and then it gets a little like crusty, right? Like it's
yeah,
obviously you have to go again and again to make sure that you keep the dirt off the shelves. But like he was saying that his word was next because he always has to think like what's the next thing? What's the next thing I'm doing? And I feel like if you have an anchor like I want to write more stuff that inspires hope, it like makes you kind of passionate about that and more likely to write than not having that.
correct, because it immediately takes the focus off of me and
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
onto the audience. It serves a greater good. Like I I have a trouble with I love being a comedian. Like I can't believe I get to do this.
Yeah.
I always wanted to. I didn't think I'd ever be allowed to do it. Like
Yeah,
I
yeah.
had to be born special. And like we started the show talking about Ari. I think he's one of the best comedians in the world.
Crazy.
Like to ever do it. I feel why am I whispering like he's in the other room?
No, I've listened to Ari for a long time. Like I
And
remember like early
he's
JRE
incredible.
days and seeing the growth even just in the last like whatever it was 10 years of me being a fan, maybe like 12 years of me being a fan of his. It's insane. Watching like passive aggressive and then watch Jew and you go like, "Oh man, like that's growth." Like
Yeah.
you can see like how he's stepping into that's his like magnum opus for sure.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. It's a masterpiece.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
But like, so I love being a comedian. I love being on stage. I love hanging out with comedians. But the one thing I don't like is all the promotion you kind of have to do. And like,
Yeah,
it's like, I
it
don't,
feels like it should be someone else's job.
yeah, like,
Like, I would much rather pay someone to do all my social media for me.
yeah. but then whatever. So, but if I step back and I go, my whole job, if the place is a if the stage is a place to give and not get, what do you
Hmm.
and I'm like, I want to give hope. I want to give that audience a hug. I want them to leave
Yeah.
feeling better. I don't want to just make them laugh. Anybody can make them laugh.
Yeah. Now I heard a different like I heard Rory Scovel talking about like what his key to comedy is. Like yours would be hope, but he was saying I actually wrote it down. I have it like off to the side. He said that it should he wants his comedy to be like him telling a secret that you didn't really want the audience to know. Like
Hmm.
if you get that feeling of like, oh, what would people think if I told them this? That's the thing you should say.
But think about dig deeper on something like that because what that'll ultimately do is let people know they're not alone,
Hmm. Which gives
right?
them hope.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can pull it right back to it.
I fell in love with stand up again by mentoring somebody that always wanted to do it.
Oh, nice.
And he couldn't due to financial reasons and the responsibilities of being a father. And it was about a year ago now. And I met him at a coffee shop, helped him get his first material together. And then I took him to an open mic in Central Florida, a little tiny room, but there was like over 30 comedians that signed up for it. And some of them drove hours, three
Man.
hours to be there to get 5 minutes. And I was like, how lucky am I that I get to do this? And it reminded me of what it was like it felt like that. I remember my open mic spots, like it felt like that was literally everything in my life was that
Hmm.
comedy store. And it just inspired a tremendous amount of gratitude and responsibility. Where I'm like, what am I? Okay, all right, I am a comedian. I really, and then like when I went to go visit the comedy store a couple weeks ago, I'm like, they remember me. They're still my friends. And everybody's like, we love you. And I went to,
That's some childhood shit right there too. Like
yeah,
that's I have the exact same thing that happens to me. I'm like, oh, you guys, you oh cool. Like you
yeah.
you think I'm
And then
great.
I
That's
didn't think
good.
I was cool enough to go to
Uh,
Joe's Club. I didn't
yeah.
think I was cool enough to be allowed in Austin. And like the reception I got from Tony and Red Band and Joe and Adam, it just made me like want to cry. I'm like, wow, this is the coolest thing ever. So if I've been given the coolest thing ever, how can I turn that into a gift for people? And I think,
Hmm.
oh,
Yeah,
at least
right. Because it brings on a new responsibility. Initially, I think you're trying to get to that point. And I think what a lot of comics too don't necessarily realize is that the people that they're doing the open mics with are eventually going to be their Tonys and their red bands and their, you know what I mean? But a
100%.
lot of comics are stuck in the like, oh, I just want to be attached to the people that are up top. That's why Joe probably has like a lot of people up his ass every day asking for like favors and whatever, right? Because they want to be adjacent to the current light, right?
Oh, yeah,
But if they just look around, it's like there's genius surrounding you. Like there's this comic in Ottawa named Emmett Morrison, and he's a killer comic. But like people, he's in Ottawa. Do you know what I mean? Like people just haven't like seen his stuff yet. And I'm like, I'd much rather be buddies with that guy who I know in like 10 years he's going to be massive, like Mitch Hedberg
yeah.
style, like level of comic, than trying to reach for other people's friend groups. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I remember, I mean, that's what made the comedy stores such a beautiful, magical place, right? Like just dreamers from all over the world showed. And then when I was there, when Ari was there, like comedy was dead.
Yeah.
There was no podcasting, there was no social media, there was no streaming services, there was no sitcoms in development, there was no hope. There was
Yeah.
but comedians just did it because we loved it. And
Uh-huh.
I do remember some amazing advice from Joe Rogan very early on. This was maybe pre-Fear Factor Joe Rogan. So like
Damn, news
2000,
radio.
his radio Joe Rogan 2001.
Nice.
And he said that fame comes to you in stages and it has to, or else you would lose your mind. And he said, like, the first stage is that you become friends with somebody that's famous. And I remember he told a story. It's so funny what you do remember, you know? And he had just gotten back from a road gig in Florida with Joey Diaz was his opener. Could you imagine seeing that show in a club?
That would have been crazy.
Yeah, and
2001. Just
crazy.
Joey Diaz, like the terrorists are coming, cocksuckers.
Dude,
It would have been
nobody's
crazy.
funnier in the history
Yeah.
of funny.
Yeah.
Nobody's funnier. Like I try to tell kids that at the comedy store, this generation of door guys, I'm like, until you've seen Uncle Joey in the OR, you haven't seen the comedy store come alive.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
a lot of people kill. I go, yeah, there are plenty of funny people out there, but
Yeah.
there's only one Joey Diaz. And what he does is more of a force of nature. It can't even be put in the words. It's more than stand up. It's not even stand up. It's like being in the a hurricane.
Wow.
It's insane. It's the greatest thing ever. And I don't, it'll never be able to translate fully to the screen. You have to be there live to
Yeah.
appreciate it.
The Rogan story, though, you were saying that they,
But what Rogan had said, it comes to you
yeah.
first, you're friends with somebody that's famous and it doesn't seem weird. And then he said, one of your friends will become famous. And he was like, that's when it starts to become real. And then he was like, one of your friends is going to get this is, 25 years ago. He was like, one of your friends will get the Tonight Show. And you'll be like, that's amazing. And then you go, I guess I'll get the Tonight Show soon. And it starts to become real. Because if they can do it, I can do it. He
Yeah.
goes, the problem is then one of your friends is going to get booked on a sitcom, and then they're going to be a movie star, and then somebody else is going to do this. And you still haven't gotten the Tonight Show yet. And he goes, so by the time you get the Tonight Show, it's not even that big a deal. You're like, whatever, it's just the Tonight Show. Ari's over there making movies, and like that. And he goes, then before you know it, you're famous and it didn't even phase you.
Hmm.
That's how you keep your sanity in.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense because, and it also makes sense why a place like Hollywood can be so, like, such a bubble for them because it's just what's normal, right? To be surrounded by other people who have had these, to us in Canada, these amazing, like, feats of accomplishments, but for them to not act as stressed out by it or feel like the fame of it is just part of doing whatever it is, acting, music, comedy.
Yeah.
It's interesting, yeah, how that community kind of forms around that. When did you decide to move from, did you move Philly right to LA? Like what was that like for you?
It was kind of an act of desperation, if you really want to know the truth.
Yeah, I want to know the
Um,
truth.
it was during a quarter life crisis, and I was raised very fortunate. You don't know what you have, but I come from a very loving home, which is rare. And my parents are really good people. And then I sort of felt like I was raised for a world that didn't exist.
Mm.
Like I got out into the world and I'm like, I don't think I can do this. Like, I don't want to go to hell. Like, and just what normal people can do, they're so strong. And like to get up every day and go to a job that like sucks. And I didn't want to lie to anybody. I didn't want to take advantage of anybody. And I was just profoundly miserable. And then through like God's grace, Pauly Shore came to Philadelphia and hosted a stand-up comedy contest. And there was like one or two rounds before and the finals were at a theater, and I wound up winning this comedy contest. And I had already quit my job because I had wanted to go to LA.
Mm.
Um, and then Paulie's road manager wrote his phone number down on a piece of paper because I helped them carry their t-shirts to their limo. I helped with,
Oh, nice.
and he was like, "Oh, you're funny. You're a good dude. If you ever make it to LA, give me a call." And then I was waiting for the right time to do it. And my dad was like, "Hey, man, there's never a right time in life." He's like, "Sometimes you just got to do it." And the next morning, I woke up and packed up my car and just drove. And
Wow.
I didn't have a job. I didn't have an apartment. I didn't have a credit card, and I didn't really have any money.
Only a comic and a derelict would be that crazy. I've done the same thing, man. Like going from my small town to Toronto to pursue comedy. I was like just hoping that it was going to work out, basically. Trying to find like whatever job I could to pay the bills, and then it was like just do stand up.
Isn't it amazing how that happens though? It
Yeah.
like it, it
That's what I realized at this point. I never allow myself to really stress or worry because I'm like, I will, and not it will figure itself out. I will figure it out. Like
yeah.
when it comes down to it, I will do what is necessary to figure out how to get through this situation.
Yep.
That's even what I've done when I moved apartments. I always got an apartment that was a little bit more than what I thought that I could afford. And then I would end up making more money in order
Absolutely.
to get the apartment. Like it was like once I figured that out, I was like, oh, okay, I can just
Work
adapt.
out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's
100%.
so interesting the way that
But you don't
works.
know that as a young person.
No, it's scary too to take that risk.
Oh, you have to. Like, but then once you start to learn how to live, face fear, it's not, it's like, no, this, like, you'll get through it. It'll work out. Things,
Yeah,
it's the coolest.
yeah, yeah. What is I always love asking comics, but like what is your writing process generally like? Are you the type of person that you allow something to come to you? Do you sit down every night for an hour or 2 hours and try to write? Like what works
Uh,
for you?
I do very, very little writing. I prefer, like I was alluded to earlier in the conversation, I prefer to write on stage.
Hmm.
When you have that beautiful relationship with a great crowd, certain things will just come out. Um, and then you have to put like a little work in. Like, I don't know where, like a bit that I'm in love with right now. Uh, I think I did it to make my brother laugh, but like I didn't realize I had a Philadelphia accent when I moved to LA, right? And I, I remember trying like talking Spanish, but with a Philadelphia accent, and that was so like "Como te llamas?"
Yeah.
You, right? So I've just been
Yeah.
playing around with that on stage,
Yeah.
and then I'm like, well, why is that funny? And then, because I've also noticed, like here in rural Florida, I've heard people with a southern accent speaking Spanish, and they're like, well, muy bien, amigo, muy bien. And then, like, after this
Yeah.
5 shows in San Diego, I'm like, how beautiful is this? That as human beings, we have this need to connect and show love and appreciation. And I'm like, that's it. Like, because I remember, I'm not a great writer, but I have a great memory. And maybe 15 years ago, when I was living in Santa Monica, which is like a tourist destination for people around the world, I saw two German guys. They walked right past me on the street, and they were so happy to be speaking English that they were speaking English to each other, not their mother tongue. They weren't speaking,
Yeah.
but there they were in California living their dream. And I heard the one guy as he's passing by me, he goes, yesterday when we were on the PCH driving our Harleys, and his friend looked at him and went, yeah, the ultimate cool. Like, and I'm like, oh, that's a bit. Like I'll be able
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
tie in the Spanish stuff, being connected. We need each other. I started to do a bit about when I was in LA and I was homesick, and I used to love watching tourists from Philadelphia and how that would make me feel at home. So that bit's sort of like just reporting what I see and then trying to find a point of view on it. I
Mm.
think is what makes it stand up. Like one of
Yeah.
the things I love helping young comedians. I like it just I love helping people in general, and I don't have many tangible skills. Like if you're like, dude, my car broke down, I'm like, I'd like to help. I'll hold the light,
Like I'll help you find somebody who can do that.
Exactly. But I'm like, oh, you want to learn stand up? I could
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like one of the things I really do believe this, um, and I'd love let me run it by you. What I think stand up comedy is actually another language.
Hmm.
It's like you have to take your thoughts and learn how to translate them into stand up because you could have a funny thought and it's funny. And if you
Hmm.
explain it to your buddy one-on-one, they'll get it. If you're a funny dude, they're like, oh yeah, that's funny. But then how do you translate that to an audience? And that's the process where
Yeah.
you, all right, you have to work it out. That's why it's always stage time. If you're a comedian, something's not working, the solution is
Grind it out more. Yeah. Yeah.
right. You need to spit it out, spit it out, spit it out. And I go, the problem with stand-up comedy is if you over explain it, it's not funny. If you under explain it, it's not funny. What you have to do is give the audience the dots and let them connect it. It's like those little activities books when you were a kid, connect the dots. You're like, this is a bunch of dots. And you're like, no, connect them. Then there's the picture. So my writing process now is I, after 24 years of doing stand up, I know how to speak the language.
Hmm.
What I need is quality stage time, which is a challenge for everybody that's not famous,
Yeah,
everybody.
of course.
Quality, not just stage time,
But
quality stage time.
I would even argue people that are famous and are doing like arenas or theaters, they can often fall into a trap of like anything they say is funny to their audience. The audience for the first like 20 minutes is just psyched to see them in front of them.
Yeah,
Like they're gonna be hysterical about everything that comes out of your mouth. And so in terms of like the art of stand up, it's probably why a lot of people will just pop into comedy clubs because they don't want it to be their audience. They want to see if it is truly funny. And I
right.
think in Steve Martin's book, he even wrote about how he like thought about quitting because he wasn't sure if like everything he was saying they were just laughing at because he was who he
If you
was.
hit that level. Yeah,
Yeah, it's like a real thing where you get too successful and then it takes away from the art.
yeah, like when he said the three stages of being a comic. First it's silence, then it's laughter, then it's applause.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
He's great.
Yeah, yeah. That's crazy though to think about that you can get to that level where you
I
have
would
to
love to
start
get to that level.
working. Yeah, great level to get at, but like it's a whole different ball game to deal with for sure. Yeah. I think when people are starting, it's better to write out that joke structure until it becomes like stuck in your head. I feel like someone at your level, or have you always just written on stage? Because I was going to say somebody at your level has been like, you've probably written for a fair bit ahead of that, like bits, knowing the structure. And then
Um,
now when you think in the joke structure.
for me, the toughest, like when I made that transition from whatever I was doing to more of a storyteller, that took a long time to figure out how to tell stories. Um, but now the toughest thing for me is finding a reason to say it. Like, okay, this is funny, this might work, but it'll hit harder if there's a reason to say it.
Hmm.
And then to also like the transitions in between bits. So it doesn't seem contrived. So it's more conversational. And I think that's very much a Comedy Store thing. Like if you see guys that developed in the original room, they don't switch gears hard. And there are also other amazing comedians, but in the span of 7 minutes, they're going to cover 10 topics. They're like, so I was at the mall. My kids are crazy. My dog did this. But a Comedy Store guy coming out of that Richard Pryor, Sam Kinison sort of cloth, where it's like, hey man, I'm opening up my world. And we're gonna
Yeah.
and that's really what I want to pay homage to. I feel so blessed to have that, to have a Comedy Store black belt, as Tony Hinchcliffe says. It's a cool thing.
Yeah, yeah, that is sick. What was it like for you to watch, like you said early on, the Comedy Store being absolutely dead to, where it's at now, where I'm sure they are packed every night still.
Um, I think one of the perspective I have on it now is you could be living through history and not even realize it. And that the reason why I'm saying that is because I'm assuming if we're having a talk with to this detail on stand-up comedy, you probably get a lot of comics that listen to your podcast. That's an
Yeah,
assumption.
I hope so.
And I hope they're listening to this too, because I want them to realize every time they're at an open mic or every time they have a gig, every time they're hanging out with their comedian buddies, let your heart be filled with gratitude. Don't just be going like it's to what you had said earlier. There, it's better to appreciate and love your open mic buddies, your crew, than to
Hmm.
try to like, oh, if Dave Chappelle knew I existed, I could become famous.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
stick to the process and you'll be the Dave Chappelle for your friends. You know, to see the Comedy Store, I mean, I I guess I was so living in the moment and just trying so hard to survive financially and what my next meal was. I don't I knew this. I was enough of a comedy nerd that and I knew the level of talent I was surrounded by.
Mm.
I knew that if comedy ever came back, if it ever came back,
Yeah, yeah.
Comedy Store would be the epicenter. I knew that for a fact. I
You
knew
could
that
just
there were,
feel that energy, and like you felt like the people that you were surrounded with were like, oh, these are the people at the
dude,
top of their game.
I got to see Joey Diaz and Sebastian go up every night for 5, 6 nights a week.
That's crazy.
And I knew those guys,
That's basically Harvard. You went to Harvard University
and
for
but here's the thing,
comedy.
I knew they were
Yeah.
funny when the world didn't know they were funny.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I knew they were funnier than the stinky comedians that Hollywood was putting out there.
Yeah, yeah.
I knew that.
That
When Bill
trash
Burr
on Comedy
moved
Central.
to LA, when I saw Bill Burr working out his stuff like in 2008, I'm like, this dude's better. Like it was if the world wanted to laugh, I knew the Comedy Store was going to be the place.
Yeah.
What I couldn't anticipate was how technology would influence and foster that. I didn't know that podcasting would change the world.
Oh
I
yeah. It's
I didn't know
crazy.
that people were going to be watching clips on their phones. Um, like somebody is putting together a documentary on the Kill Tony podcast.
Really.
Yeah,
It's amazing.
on its because Tony sold out Madison Square Garden.
That's so crazy. A
It's
podcast. It is truly the number one live podcast in the world.
in the world.
That's
And
insane.
Tony,
Yeah.
I still can't get over like I'm so happy and proud for that kid because I he worked so hard. He
Yeah.
worked his ass off. And he was always funny, always talented. He always had a tremendous amount of
Yeah.
confidence. But dude, I remember like it was yesterday, them, Brian and Tony having to get permission to do it in the smallest room at the Comedy Store. And the
Yeah.
talent coordinator at the time breaking their balls.
Yeah. Yeah.
To
I
see it,
got to watch them in the when I went, I got to watch them in the main room, and it was just unreal. There was a moment where one of the people on stage were like they like told him to he was wearing like a shirt that like his ex bought him or something, and they're like, light it on fire, like fuck her, like be done with it. And he was like, oh, okay. And he lights the shirt on fire, and you can see the panic in Tony's face. Red Band's just crying, laughing, like doesn't give a fuck. And Tony's like, oh my God, this is gonna ruin our opportunity to like keep performing in like this area. Like we need to stop this. He's like, okay, all right, that's enough. But you could tell he cared about it. That's why he was like, oh shit, like that's too far.
that's, I mean, that how long ago was that?
Oh, this would have been like 2019.
So maybe 5 years.
Yeah,
And they go
insane.
from that to 20 plus thousand, 40,000 tickets sold in the market.
Yeah,
It's just,
it gives you hope.
yeah, 100% gives you hope.
You know what I mean?
And I do remember this. I remember in 2003, Paulie and his brother Peter were doing what they could to try to save the Comedy Store. And they were inviting like famous alumni to come back to do shows because the Comedy Store needed a new roof. Couldn't
Oh,
afford.
no way.
Whenever it would rain, we'd have to put buckets out all over the Comedy Store.
Fuck.
And like the coolest person to come back was Robin Williams. And he was so awesome. Like he bought, this how long ago we faxed our our solicitation over to Robin. And then I was answering phones, and he called right. I knew who it was. It was like, Landing Patch Productions. I thought this was the Comedy Store. And I
Yeah.
was like, it's a Comedy Store. And I was like, put my hand over the phone. It was like in Ghostbusters, like, we got one. I knew who
Yeah.
it was. So Robin agreed to do the show. He bought half the tickets
Wow.
because he knew how many industry comps there would be. So he
Yeah.
bought half of them to give them away. He wanted a lav mic. We couldn't get that working. So he did 2 hours without a microphone. Uh,
What?
yeah. He talked about his Juilliard training. So
What
he
the
did
hell was that like, man? That's living through history. Seeing Robin Williams at the Comedy Store doing 2 hours without a microphone.
his
Clip
first
it.
his first line was, "This is the first time I've ever been asked to do a benefit for a $20 million piece of real estate." Off to the races.
Just crushed immediately. Yeah.
Crushed. Did like crowd work for an hour, then an hour of material. Um, I had a great conversation with him afterwards. He was so sweet and kind. And one of the things that he had said was the Comedy Store is the only place in the world where a kid can show up with a dream and leave a star. So he was like, you have to make sure this. He was just so sweet. But during that time frame, Mitzi knew. Mitzi was so aware of the level of talent that was in the building during those years. And I remember her telling me, because I was her assistant, and she was like,
Oh, cool.
Peter and Paulie don't get it. It's not about stars. The Comedy Store is a nursery for stars. It's going to be my babies that save the store, not washed up comedians. And I remember her telling me, she was like, there's going to be lines down the block to see this generation of comics.
Wow. And she was right.
Spot,
That's the crazy thing is that she was dead right.
spot
Like,
on.
that's crazy to watch that kind of growth. And like she also would put people that she wanted to see how they would do after really great comics, right? Like you'd have to follow somebody that's a show closer. That's like
Yeah.
that would send half the room out before you even got on stage.
Yeah.
Was there anyone that you had to follow that you were like, oh, like shaking in your boots a little bit?
Well, it's funny because I remember asking that question to Andrew Dice Clay because he said he would beg Mitzi to let him follow the best in the world. So because he knew he wanted to get good. So
Ah.
he would ask to follow Eddie Murphy, Richard Pryor, Robin Williams. And I was like, wow. I go, who was the toughest? And he said, Ollie Joe Prater. And I'm like, and then he told me who Ollie Joe was, who was like a big heavy set cowboy from Oklahoma that would walk out on stage with like a gun holsters, but instead of 6 shooters, he had long neck Budweisers. Spin a beer out like a pistol, take the
Yeah.
cap off with his teeth, spit the cap up, out, chug the beer, spin the bottle back, put it in his holster, and say, "That there's all I ever learned in college." And he said from that point on, Ollie would crush. And he said what made Ollie
Uh,
difficult to follow was his likability and his lovability. He was like, you just love the dude. I was very blessed to have to follow great comics all the time. But I remember realizing I was a real comedian when about 10 years ago, I had to follow Louis at the peak of his power. And like it was like when the Louis TV show was getting accolades, he was selling out Madison Square Garden. And it was truly like a master artist in the prime of their career.
mhm.
And the audience was electric to get to see him do what he does. And I remember, I think somebody was supposed to follow him, but Louis went long and they didn't want to follow him. And I was just in the back of the room being a fan. Like I was like, this is just fun to watch.
Yeah.
Um, and then they were like, all right, Steve, you're going to go on next. So, to his credit, this makes a huge difference when I've found when you have to follow great comedians. It's how they introduce you.
Mm-hmm.
Because at the Comedy Store, you tag team it. There's no host. So if a comedian doesn't like you, they could bury you. Like I've heard stories, legendary stories where I'm not going to mention names, but
Oh, that
one
sucks.
one
Uh,
comedian who was very well respected and very famous was told to limit his stage time because another very famous comedian at the time wanted to go on after him. And this particular club said, just do 10 minutes because so and so wants to follow you. So this amazing comedian did his 10 minutes and then said, hey, I don't normally do this, but if anybody wants a picture, I'm going to be outside smoking a cigarette. And the whole, so it always pays to be nice to comedians. They can.
Christ. I
Um,
mean, it's funny though. Like,
funny.
it's funny. Like, if you're just in it for the sake of comedy, like, I get where he's coming from. Like, for whatever reason, but I mean, it could also be coming from a place of like he just doesn't like that person. And I
I don't
think,
know. I was not
yeah.
that. I just, I don't even know if that's a true story.
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
understand
It's a good story though.
if, yeah, even if that's a lie,
Yeah.
that proves the point that if a comedian doesn't give you a good intro, it could make it, they could make it impossible to follow. But
Yes.
this is how amazing of a human being. And I have not gotten a chance to thank Louis for this in person. I haven't gotten a chance because he's, pretty much based out of New York, and I'm very shy around people I don't know, especially awesome people. I get shy around. Um, so I never had a chance to thank him for this. But Louis crushes, right? I don't even remember how much time he did, but he murdered that room. And he said, who's next? And our piano player, God rest his soul, Jeff Scott, was like, Steve Simeone. And Louis says, who? And the whole audience laughed, right?
Yeah.
So Louis goes, who's next? And Jeff goes, Steve Simeone. And Louis goes, who? But it was a genuine who. It was he
Yeah.
wasn't saying it to be a jerk, but the whole audience laughed. And then Louis said this. It's not verbatim, but it was something like, hey man, here's the thing. Says this to the audience. Here's the thing. You're at the greatest comedy club in the world. This is the world famous Comedy Store. It took me forever to break into this club. So I don't know who this next comic is, but I know if he's good enough to be on the stage, he's worthy of my attention. So I'm going to sit in the back of the room. I'm going to watch him, and I can't wait to see what he's all about. And I hope you do the same thing. All the love in the world to Steve Simeone. So
That's a real one.
a real one. I get to shake his hand, and Louis' whole set was on why God isn't real. I shake his hand one more time for Louis C.K. And I said, I know Louis doesn't believe in God, but just hearing him announce my name is enough proof to me that God's real. And the audience went boom. And then I was like,
Yeah.
this is true. What else is honest? And that's what the original room at the Comedy Store teaches you.
Mm-hmm.
Acknowledge your thoughts, always be present, always be in the moment. And then I said I was in the back of the room watching Louis. And one of the things I would do, and it's honest, I was like, wasn't that an amazing experience? Like this is how you connect with an audience.
Yeah.
Feel what they're feeling, and eventually they'll feel what you're feeling.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm like, wasn't that amazing? And they're like, yeah. I go, this is going to be a story we get to tell everybody tomorrow. I go, truthfully, I was in the back of the room and I looked at the talent coordinator. I'm like, who's going to have to follow this? And they were like, you are. Right. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and from there off to the races
Yeah. Yeah.
because he gave me such a great introduction. And I was able to not just know the lessons of the Comedy Store, but to apply them, which is always be honest, always be in the moment. And that ties into the writing process.
Yeah, I know.
You
And
know?
like being able to be comfortable, I think when there is like a silent period definitely helps build that tension and allows you to think more in the moment. Like there couldn't have been a better way to, if you had just jumped into material, the crowd would have been like, aren't you going to acknowledge what just happened? Like, but a lot of comics forget that though. They're too attached to the material, they're too married to the material. I think it was Bill Hicks who said that like you just go on stage and be honest and then you fall back on the material.
Yeah,
Like
material.
it's the material is what you fall back on when you've run out of current ideas or current ways of assessing the situation.
Yeah, and that's like since I moved to Florida and I haven't been doing as much stand-up as I mean, recently I have been, but I was doing like a lot of corporate gigs and things like that. And I forgot some of those lessons.
Hmm.
So I'm so excited. Like I do have this new special coming out, and I hope it'll do something. I hope in post-production we can make it something I can live with. Um, but I'm so excited to get out on the road more and to meet more people, make more friends, and hopefully just give them some hope. Like, hey man, everything's gonna be okay.
Yeah,
That's
100%.
what I do the best.
Now, Steve, there's a question that I ask all my guests. And first, you have to imagine yourself as you at 15 years old. I
Okay.
always say yourself because I find it's easier to give advice to yourself in this situation because you know what you were going through. And it also makes the advice more unique and more tailored to yourself. But the phone rings and it's you now on the other end. You can give your 15-year-old self some advice. What do you say? Also, knowing that it won't affect your current timeline whatsoever.
I would say don't give up. Like, wow, that's such a cool question because I was so like, I think the life I have now, my 15-year-old self couldn't comprehend it. Like the way I grew up, like I just didn't think, I mean, I'm at a loss for words because I would for sure just say don't give up, put God first and just see what happens. Because the truth is, like if you told my 15-year-old self that I'd get to do all these amazing things, I'd be like, well, you must have a mansion and a private jet, and you're married to some gorgeous Latina and you live in Malibu.
Not the
I'm like,
gorgeous Latina.
you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
and it's like, no, none of those things happen,
yeah,
but the experiences that you have. And I really do, even now, at this point in my career, I firmly believe the best is yet to come. Like, because I'm just having so much fun with the stand up and I'm starting to really dig into the stuff I really want to do. But at 15 years old, if you told me that I would have babysat Andrew Dice Clay's kids, I would have been on a tour bus with Pauly Shore, that my best friends would become the most famous comedians of a generation, I could
And
my
answering Robin Williams' phone call. That's
dude,
that's
that what really went down with that Robin story. It sounds like a lie I would have made up at 15 years old just so people would be my friends.
I love that.
Like Robin was just such a sweet human being. Um, and comes in, does the main room show. First time I've ever seen the main room electric like that. Oh, I mean, it was lying down the block, celebrities hanging out. Robin's, I'd never performed, I'd never stood on stage in the main. It took me another 5 years to get past by mid.
Wow.
Um, and then since I'm a door guy, they were like, after the whole room is gone, it's an hour after the show, the main room is empty, and they say, Steve, go stand on the stage to make sure nobody gets backstage. There's multiple security, whatever. I'm just standing on the main room stage for the first time in an empty main room,
Wow.
and Robin Williams walks through. And I'm taking in what happened that night. He's standing right next to me. He's taking in what happened that night. And I'm like, you have to say something. And I said, Mr. Williams? Anyone call me Robin? Okay, Robin. And he saw my shirt. He goes, oh, you're a door guy here? I go, yeah. He goes, Mitzi still make all the all the door guys for comics? I go, oh yeah, Mr. Williamson, thank you so much for doing this benefit for the comedy store. And he said, Steve, I didn't do the benefit for the comedy store. He's like, I did it for you and all the other young comics. was like, Comedy Store is the only place in the world where a kid can show up with a dream at an open mic and leave a star. So he said, don't thank me, just promise me that 20 years from now, when you're the biggest comedian in the world, you come back and do a benefit for the Comedy Store so it keeps going for the next generation. I mean, how cool of a dude is Robin Williams?
That's crazy. Chills, man. What a
Crazy.
story.
Yeah.
Steve, I'm going to share your stuff here for people watching on YouTube. Thank you. Hit that subscribe button. It's Steve Simeone Comedy on Instagram, at Steve Simeone on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it. AwesomeSteve.com to find out the tour.
Yeah, I don't even have to update all my stuff. This stuff is stuff I stink at. Like I think it all. And I
well,
know
go to those places. That's where it'll be updated, right?
I don't know. But I know
you're like, we'll see.
I'm going to be in Winnipeg coming up.
Oh, cool.
And I can't wait to get back. I love Canada.
Yeah, yeah.
And we'll have to hang out whenever I'm in Toronto.
Yeah, man. I'm in Ottawa now. So come
Ottawa?
do a show in Ottawa. Yeah, yeah.
Let's do it. Is there a Yuck Yucks there?
Yeah, there's a Yuck Yucks. I bet you could book a Yuck Yucks easy. There's a Yuck Yucks. There's also another place called Laugh Lounge. There's also Absolute Comedy.
There's 3 clubs there?
Yeah, dude, it's popping. There's a new one too that popped up called Cultures Comedy Club. Like we're building like a good scene here.
That's incredible.
I'm just going on shows. I started a monthly show, but that's all I'm doing right now.
Do you think you're going to do the show at the Mothership in July?
I don't know if it'll be at the Mothership. I'm thinking he didn't tell me where it was going to be, but it might be at Red Band's Club.
Oh, that's great. Right next.
Either that or at Creek and Cave. I'm not sure, but either way, I'd be pumped. Whatever venue it's at, it's gonna be
Austin's
amazing.
a comedy town.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
What Nashville is for music, that.
Yeah, I just can't wait to see that. Like, I want to get like right downtown and like try to see everything.
Well, I'm gonna make sure you have my number, and as soon as you, whatever trip it is, if you're gonna be in LA or Austin, and obviously if you're ever in Florida and you want lasagna,
yeah, sure.
Stop by. My mom loves to cook. But
nice.
If you're going to be in LA or Austin, I'd love to meet you.
Sure, man. Yeah.
And just keep on talking about comedy.
Yeah, nerd out about comedy. It's my favorite thing to do.
Me too.
All right, man. Well, thanks so much for making the time. I really appreciate it.
Of course, buddy. I'm sorry I didn't have more energy. I'm just talking about.
Oh, you're great, man. You were touring. I understand.
This was like talking to an old friend.
Yay, that's great. I love that. Nice. Well, you have a great rest of your day.
You too, and God bless you, brother.
All right,
Thanks.
take care.
You've been listening to The Johnny Rogers Show. New episodes air every Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.